So I think neither Jeff nor Jose need any introduction here. I mean, Jeff spends all kinds of time here, and Jose hopefully will continue to visit more frequently. And I jotted down some notes this way. I didn't really think about this, and then I thought I should say something, and so I scribbled down some notes, and then I didn't have time to look at them again, so I hope they make sense. But I just wanted to say a few things about the two books that we have. Jeff's Question of Qualities, which was edited by Alex Myman. Alex, you here? Okay. He's in Los Angeles. And then Ed and Suburbia Ego, José Oubrie's Miller House, which I edited. So I was thinking, I was looking at the poster for Jeff's exhibition downstairs, which opens at 7, which I assume everybody's going to come to. And I really like that quote that he has given in various contexts, that architecture derives its most mysterious and ancient powers from its contact with the earth. That's how architecture stages the political possibilities and new forms of freedom that I think Jeff spends a hell of a lot of time talking about, and I think very convincingly, and I'm sure we'll hear he and Eric avoid that topic tonight. So this afternoon I wanted to posit a slightly different spin, although after hearing the thesis talk, I think it's not as different as maybe I thought it might be, but we'll see. And so I want to posit that architecture derives other equally mysterious and ancient powers from its immersion in language, and particularly storytelling. And so when I say storytelling, I mean something different from critique, I mean something different from theory, and different from, and probably a little bit closer to history. So if we think of criticism and theory as kind of compelling you to believe something by the power of truth or logical argument, I mean, stories engage you in a different way, and the technique that they use is generally detailed description as opposed to argument. And the two books, I think, what I really like about these two books, other than, they're filled with my friends and mentors, is that that for the most part, the articles in them, or the essays in them, are really great examples of architectural storytelling. And so if we take Jeff's book first, we all know of Jeff as a theorist and a critic, but I actually like him best as a storyteller. And so Jeff the critic, I think, exists quite well in essays like the Moneo's Anxiety, I think really demonstrates his powers as a critic, or Towards New Architecture for sort of advancing ideas in the discipline. But what I really like are some essays that aren't in the book. The Paint and Stories essay on Fabian Marcaccio, I think, is a really great example of storytelling, which you should all go look up. Or the Star Wars 3 essay, a long-forgotten piece of propaganda about a long-forgotten studio that Peter Eisenman taught at Harvard. Or even if you look at something that seems overtly theoretical, like Twisting the Separatrix, I think in many ways it's a kind of rip and yarn about Eisenman's games with Derrida, and it actually drips with Jeff's own riffs on Derrida's techniques. That it really interests me as much for its verbal form as much for his arguments. And so that's what I really like about a lot of this stuff. And if you look at those essays carefully, which I think a lot of us have, what you start to see is that Jeff tends to write like he was right there in the thick of it, not like he was watching from a distance, which is what the etymology of theory would tell you it does, but rather more like he's running all over the field, which is what the etymology of narrative would suggest. And if you look at Jeff's essays in terms of the techniques that he uses, the older essays, they tend to trade heavily in wordplay, like the title Peter's Progress and the hyphenations and brackets and things like that, or sort of aphoristic forms like his rare but certainly worth turning up In the Manner of Nietzsche collection. But if you look at the more recent essays, and I think maybe beginning with Cunning of Cosmetics and moving from there, what you start to see is a move away from that kind of trickery toward something that I'd call more like lascivious description, or so the kind of almost tenderness with which he approaches Herzog and Demeron, or the incredible proliferation of tangents, which results in the essay on the Miller House, which is in the book there. So I kind of look at these texts in a slightly different way. And then if we turn to the other book, the book on the Miller House, I mean, José is someone who I think is not necessarily known for his words, but he's rather known for his buildings and his drawings. And but as anybody that knows him knows, José is a really good storyteller. And the Miller House, as the book suggests, I think lends itself to those kinds of stories. If you read the article or the interview that John McMurrow did with José about the house, very close to the beginning, José talks about his desire to find or discover a new language of architecture, to break free of the Corbusian idiom of his training. Now, I think he was actually inventing a new language, not finding one, but I think we can quibble about that elsewhere. He then develops a story. He develops with an architectural myth or a fairy tale, which is the birth of geometry from point to line to surface, which he borrows from Kandinsky and used as the kind of focus of the 3 houses that were initially going to go on the site in Kentucky, where the Miller House now is. You look a little closer, the west wall, which we'll fly by here in a minute, he refers to quite specifically as the metaphor. Never really explains that. He just says this is a metaphor of a facade. So maybe he'll explain it today. That if you look, the materials and the details and the components of the building are in a kind of conversation with each other. And when you look at the text, did it just go by?
Yeah, you missed it.
Okay, so 30 more slides. There it is.
Oh, yeah, sorry.
When you look at the text, a strange number of writers, and I don't think accidentally, found their way into the house through language. So Jeff, not to give away too much, saw an interesting connection with Geoffrey Chaucer. Or Mike Cadwell, who's out there someplace, saw Falstaff as a kind of model for describing not just José, but also some of the aspects of the house. And as you'll see in the introduction, I mean, I kind of kept hearing Deleuze and Guattari's description of Kafka's writings when looking at the house. José, of course, his discussions of the house are always peppered with citations to people like Leopardi or Proust or Merleau-Ponty. And so the house is actually kind of saturated with language in a way that I find really interesting. And all of the essays in the book are really kind of storytelling. They don't try to make arguments, but they don't try to fix meanings. There's no finger wagging or sort of demonstration of proof, but rather there's a lot of really great descriptions. And so, just as a way to kind of open up the conversation, I wanted to ask you what you thought about the role of writing in how you make buildings, and what do you make of these kinds of relationships between writing and architecture?
I wanted you to keep saying more about how well I write.
There's only so much to say there.
There's no question in my mind that the Miller House book is patently absurd in the amount of, I wouldn't call it erudition, but the amount of writerly thought given to one house in the middle of nowhere. It's just, who needs to read 50,000 words on every possible square inch about a house that actually would take 1/10 the time to visit and have all the experiences and affects that are tried to describe in the book in about 1/10 of the time. However, it's incredible to read. I think to see that many people, the 5 writers, 6 writers, and counting you as your interview, which I think is an essay about the piece, plus the interview by John McMurrow. There's no overlaps. I mean, that's the thing I think is so amazing. There's virtually not one comment like that. It's in one that, not even one piece that gets discussed in one that gets discussed in another. So, and no one knew that. So the idea that there would be that much strong attention to a house from a strong point of view that you would never expect. For example, if you go back and you read early writings on the Glass House or the Farnsworth House, there's maybe 10 or 15 canonic details of each house that gets constantly worked through over and over and over and over again. And so I think that makes this really more novellic than critical. So I think you're completely right about that. In that sense, this is the apotheosis of what I think I do. Exactly what you were saying. I'm constantly accused of no longer being a critic, of being an apologist, actually, is what I do. So because I don't think there's really any point in criticizing architecture. I mean, you can criticize tendencies or trends, but to criticize it, like you criticize a movie, kind of makes sense. Maybe people won't go to it, but you criticize a building, what are they going to do, tear it down, or you're going to quit living in it or working in it? I guess there are occasions for that, but basically, you try to bring it to life. You perform it. I think of myself as someone who performs a building like a musician performs a score. And I look forward to another performance of the same building by another kind of musician. And so this is like an album of performances. And it's pretty amazing. And the most ridiculous of them all is Doug Graff, an impenetrable, impossible to read. It's just impossible. And I've known him and I've studied. I actually know every word he's talking about. And I edited it from 60,000 words to 30,000 words, and then Todd edited it from 30,000 words to 20,000 words, and then somebody else got it down to 15,000 words. So all this time I'm thinking, wow, this is fantastic. And finally we've really nailed what close reading is. And then I go to this lecture 2 days ago by Hernan, and basically the whole thing is an attack on close reading. We don't need close reading anymore. We need virtuosic rock and roll performances. So I'm not really sure. I don't think of this as a book whose destiny is to inhabit architecture in any kind of canonic sense. It's a kind of, don't you think it's a kind of curiosity? Because the other book is like it has fantastic drawings. It's a record of the house in a way that nothing else comes close to. But the texts are, I really don't know what to say about them. They're poetic love affairs that tell ridiculous stories. I mean, I don't know. You'll see in a minute a drawing by Jimenez Lai, which is the relationship between my reading of the Miller House and Chaucer's Miller's Tale. I don't want to give too much of away. But there's this uncanny similarity between them, very similar to the one that I think Mike got with Falstaff and Shakespeare, but when does it come? You'll see it. But
so this is the problem with looping. You just have to sit and wait.
This is weird. Why did you put this site plan in?
I was in a hurry. I think it's a good site plan. We went to the trouble of drawing it. I mean, the thing about the drawings in the book is that they never existed.
Yeah,
I mean, one thing that José never did was presentation drawings of the house.
No, wait, one thing he never did was drawings.
No, there's a hell of a lot of drawings.
No, he walked out to the site and said, I think we need a big wall like this. And then they built that wall. I said, well, okay, there it is. So,
I was working a little bit like you. When you do something,
it took me 4 times longer to write my essay than it took him to design and build a building, which I think is pretty funny, don't you think? Why do you want people to write about your stuff? Well, actually, I don't think José is a good writer. He doesn't write much, but when he writes, I quote a lot, But why is it you want people to write about your buildings?
I did not ask to anybody. You said, I want to make a book.
And then you said, great.
I said, great. Hey, why not? If anybody...
And then for 4 years, you kept saying, where's the book?
Unfortunately, no.
We could pin it. We could print an appendix of email bitching about where this book was.
Well, I have to say that
that would be as big as the book.
The 2 people that sponsored the book and have done other projects for me, dear friends of mine, Jeffrey and Elise, would also say stuff like, we have to make a report to our board of directors. Can you send me any evidence that there is such a thing as the book? I kept thinking it was kind of...
No, you were asking about writing. I don't write. I would just make drawings. And even not drawings like the one you see in the book, because I could not do it. So as Jeff said, we never did any finished drawing. Each time I was asked to publish the house, was always a big difficulty to give an information about coherent about what we were doing. Because in fact, I think if there is something interesting in this house, it's independent of all what is written there, that not by me, is that we process by pieces. So it was a very interesting experiment of building a piece of the house and building the second one, and each time it was transforming the condition to put the next piece. So in fact, even during the construction, we were constantly modifying things happening in function of different things. If there is something to it, that was, I think, in this process. For me, the other thing is the kind of idea of not make a family house, even if it was a house for a family. I don't like families, you know. The real families are families of friends, not family by blood. And so this house is made also to have the kids autonomous and able to escape from their parents all the time, which I think is a very good idea. And
Remember, right after he finished Furmity, they interviewed him about how good a church it would be. He said, I'm an atheist. So he tends to, right after he finishes the thing, he kind of trashes the institution. He's just...
And the last thing I just would say is that is always like architecture. I mean, if you go to see the house, you are impressed. And I think you were impressed.
No, it's...
And it's where you did maybe something.
It's the first time, actually, when you go to the house, I don't think you can help it. You feel joy. And first of all, that doesn't happen in architecture very often. Oftentimes you feel reverie or awe. There's lots of fantastic affects that architecture can engender, but just to feel exhilaration and joy was really surprising. And actually Peter Eiserman said something about that, and I'll mention it in a minute. And for me, that was also a little embarrassing because I did not particularly think experience and emotional issues were the most important issues to continue the project of speculative architecture. And so to find that to be the case and to be so, in fact, when Jeffrey and Elise were talking about the book, I said, you have just got to come see it. I wouldn't even let them think about the book unless they came out and saw it. And they saw it actually in a wrecked condition, and I think they still, you'll have to ask them, they're in the audience. But anyway, Peter Eiserman, God bless Peter, I don't know how he does, he's 80 years old, but he got the book and he read it cover to cover in about a week. And he called me and first of all, he complained about Ken Frampton's essay. He said it just shouldn't be in there. It just stands out like a sore thumb of a kind of writing. I mean, I don't know what you thought about that. It was nice because he's the living dean of criticism, but it's so old-fashioned and it's a way of talking about.
See, but I thought it was important to have it in there to show, the distance of the contemporary writing from the sort of traditional position.
But then Peter said, but he said he'd never realized that the house is a total breakthrough of architecture on the interior. Just completely, he had no idea, and that's where all this, we talk about. In fact, most of, I would say, the discussion of the architecture, for most of the critics except for Doug, is based on all the effects of the interior. And what he said to me is, I'm really sorry Jose felt obligated to keep the exterior in dialogue with the Corbusian language. So in other words, he saw it as a completely original interior formulation in terms of section, color, movement, the location of the apartments, the materiality. But even though he understood that the outside was to contest certain ideas of Le Corbusier, he didn't even know why he needed to bother. Why not just take the interior condition? And I'm not so sure I agree with him, but like in one sentence after having read the whole book, I understood the building in yet an entirely new way. So I don't think, there's nothing like this being a comprehensive comprehension of the building. Yeah. And now I feel like I should go back and, think about it some more. I needed more time. I knew I needed more time.
Yeah, you needed more time.
Why is this thing in here?
I just put a picture for each of the essays. This is
I
what you'll find in Jeff's book. stuff about
I forgot
these.
about these stuff.
So, Jose, you mentioned not writing. What about reading? Because I know you read a lot, and you talk about reading. Does that have anything to do with... I mean, and even your description of the house is a way to reimagine the family. I mean, it's like a kind of script.
It's so irritating.
I
Jose
read
will
the-
call you in the morning and say, have you read so-and-so? And then what I have to do is first of all, I say, yes, I've read it. Then I immediately go online.
And buy it.
First I read the Wikipedia summary of it. Then I buy it so that it sits on the house. Then I fold it up and,
Let the dog chew on it.
I mean, you can't keep up with Jose. You just can't. You can't get, he knows more, he's like you. He's like a kid. He reads he thinks everyone else does, so he does it, no one else does.
Yeah, I read a lot, but I'm not sure I understand everything because I was
I
always.
don't know, everybody else kind of looks at the pictures.
I was always the last one in class. So
What was that poet I had to read? Jack Spicer.
which
What
one?
was the poet I had to read? Book of poetry. Some guy mentioned a poet, and you bought this book of poetry, and I had to read a whole book of poetry.
I was no, not some guys. That was in the article. This American poet. Yeah, I
that's
lent
good.
you the book. Yeah, they were talking about it
Jack Spicer.
in one of the articles about Omar. There were different.
Yeah.
There was a book about Omar with different articles.
Yeah,
and
and
one guy was making reference about this guy about Kulas.
But the other thing is, Jose is honest, which is also really out of style. So like he came to like Hernan, he loves Hernan, and Hernan gives a whole lecture, shows, I don't know, 80 projects, and says, boy, I really like one.
The one I liked the best, I said his competition of the library.
If you can
was
hear him in
fun.
a lecture, he says, this is
I don't
crap."
like the dishes, not because they are not good, but because for me, I don't say the same thing, but I like it less because I think they are more Art Nouveau, more Gaudist, like your spoon, which is like these shoes for women now, which has very expensive heels.
Yes.
So, but that, why not? I mean, I was really impressed by the photograph of the special interior space of the library, because this is something which you miss in all libraries today. They're always flat stuff, and actually I'm trying, and my reference to Gaudi was not pejorative nor critical. I think it's interesting actually in architecture we see so much the same thing all the time. Where you can make categories of project, and at the end you can make 200 projects each line. So you have to find new way to do that. It's what I'm trying to do. Maybe I will arrive this time or not in the seminar I'm doing now. Is go back to something which has been vilified by architects. Example, Bruce Goff. I went to drawing drawing of the LACMA Japanese Museum. The LACMA Japanese Museum is a fantastic building. It's one of the most fantastic in Los Angeles, because it's totally out of rules. I know it's Bart Prince who finished it and so on, but the main idea, the drawings are in the library in Chicago, in the Art Institute, and you can find this. I made photographs. It's fantastic. He has some houses. It's a tube. Things you go now, you see everywhere. But I don't know. I mean, there are several architects like that, and I think it's why I think I remember one day I told Peter, I said, there is the only thing in 19th century except the beginning of modern movement was Art Nouveau. And Peter said, wow, horrible thing, Art Nouveau. Art Nouveau was fantastic.
It was fantastic.
They were trying to invent a new language, and it turned short because they did not have computers. But now they have the way to make much better than they did. No, I think it's not the thing interesting for me. You see Zaha Hadid, you see 20 million Zaha Hadid, all the same project, always long tubes. It's boring, okay? Unless you have a plan, a thing with rolls, and you go down the ramp. So we have to find something else. And I think it's one of the poetical aspects that I think for me is the most important, you know. And
But if you look at the cover of my book, which comes up, that's a painting. It's a picture of a painting that Tom Main did of an essay he commissioned for me to write about him for a book by Rizzoli.
And then rejected.
Then rejected because he was afraid if the clients read the book, that read the essay, they would not understand that he's a good architect. Because it basically says, Tom Main does good architecture and has no idea what it is he's doing and how he did it. And so he just wrote, he circled everything he disagreed with, which was like every page. And then went back and and the painting is a painting of his, what he thinks of as his brain cells. Like all those red things are brain cells. And, you know, so the fact that he loved the paint, he liked the essay, he wanted me to do the book, but he didn't want clients to read it. You know, there's a weird relationship between, I mean, it doesn't say it's a bad architect. It just says lots of times architecture's answering questions we haven't even asked to figure out how to ask yet. You know, and so I think I keep telling people, I think what we've just gone through is the most incredible period of history in architecture, and I think we're just now beginning to learn how to write about architecture for the first time. In other words, instead of it being a judgmental issue and an issue of either technical description and judgment, which is basically when I started reading architectural criticism, all it was. You know, the idea that you perform it, that you bring it alive as an existential component or as a part of the play of life. And that way, I think most of the writing that I'm interested in is written by writers from architects to architects, not really to a consuming audience. Which is why you 40 people are here, and we're trying to sell you our. Because in about 2 days, they get remaindered for 20 cents, and.
Don't tell them that. They'll just
No,
wait 2 days.
I wanted mine to be released as a third edition and remaindered.
With the little black mark on the bottom.
Now, there is a thing in the book that I find very interesting, that each people who wrote expressed something different about the art.
Well, that's I wanted
So
to
that
ask
means
you.
that it may have some kind of value, even,
Yeah, but
I don't know.
I think that's no long. The problem with, I think you're exactly right, but I think that will be the case all the time now. Now, I don't think, if we picked a building and you got 8 writers to write, you would not get the kind of convergent monotony. I think there's too much to think about a building and too many ways to think about a building and too many audiences and different kinds of performances any building can muster. And if a building isn't able to do that, that's probably a sign of its weakness.
the thing also is that Doug Graff, you know, is this sure that I had a lot of, when I work, I always work with references to a lot of different things or different periods. And but when I read Doug Graff, I said, oh my God, very intelligent, that's fantastic, you know. He finds things I never thought about.
I know, but think about that. Think about, there's 1 million words of Shakespeare. Shakespeare wrote about 1 million words. There's about 1.350 billion words, no,
Doesn't matter. Just say
a
that.
whole lot more words of commentary on what the content of Shakespeare is. So either Shakespeare was the greatest genius of all time, and before Freud knew Freud, and before Durkheim knew, or else he put stuff by being a very good playwright into the play that he didn't know he was putting in, just as a close observer of human condition that he made good plays out of. And it's been being unfolded and unfolded and unfolded since the 17th century. And certainly architecture keeps doing the same thing.
You would hope.
Sure. And so.
But because I think of other books like this, like the collection on the Arnoff Center,
Yeah.
for instance,
Yeah.
which I think it does a similar. And those essays kind of go off. I don't think they
But
cover as much ground as.
No, they're still
these,
driven by
'cause
mostly
they're still
by
in Peter's
process.
orbit in a way.
They still start with Peter's intellect, his own contention.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But Do these, like, whether those essays in the book or I think the stuff on Firminy as well that you've written, I mean, does it change the way that you look at those projects? Like, you go back and say, I wish I'd thought of that sooner, or wish I'd thought of that?
Most of them,
It's not my problem.
But does it become a problem that you want to take up in another project? Like if it,
No,
Really?
not at all.
well, first of all, I've had two things happen. I've had,
First, I never did
Architects.
two projects the same. And this project and the one before that you also want me to do something about is the one in Syria.
yeah, in Syria.
so in
Because
other
these two
words,
projects for me, because I've been always involved with the church for 40 years, were the way to get my account correct with Corbusier.
but what I'm trying to figure out is, do you read Kipnis differently than you read Proust?
Do I what?
Do you read a critic, an architecture critic, differently than you read somebody like Leopardi or Proust or this mystery?
Yeah,
poet?
because Leopardi, you make metaphors which are interesting, like an infinito. And the critic, yeah, they bring things that I did not thought about. Yeah, in this way it can help me to, but I'm more admirative of the text and what they say. Even, I don't know, it becomes an object apart from the object of the book. You know, each thing is a different object, and I like them very much. I read it.
So what you're saying is we don't write as well as we think we do.
You know-
we write as well as we think we do,
You know,
using the royal we. It's
Also, there are
just
things
our
I-
readers are not up to the task.
There are things also that I said is that someone I read Jeff, I don't understand what he says sometimes. And I was thinking of it. You remember this French philosopher Michel Serres?
Yeah, of course.
And he said, I like to read things that I don't understand, and not only my books of mathematics, but he invented this kind of gymnastic of the brain. And for me, you're my professor of gymnastic of the brain.
So I know everybody has to get back to studio, so why don't we
Sell some
take
books.
a few questions and sell some books?
Any, questions? I'm gonna have an epileptic fit if this thing keeps flashing in front of me.
Better?
Yeah, good. Here's some kind of the questions I'd like to hear you ask. How much does it cost to commission you to write about my architecture?
Andrew, you must
I
have a thought.
Your
Are
thought?
the books being sold at a discount this evening?
Yes. Yes, they are.
But the signature is extra.
Oh, we're not signing them. You know, that if you have no matter who the author is, and if it's a first edition or not, signing a signed book is almost always worth less than an unsigned book. So it's rare that getting an author to sign the book,
You just got out of a lot of work.
even first edition. I have a couple of first.
No, it's not signed, it's addressed to someone.
If it's inscribed, it's worth less than
Signed good
Oh,
inscribed.
now everybody,
Can you talk about the house a little bit?
yeah.
Go ahead.
Do you have questions about the house, or I mean?
Just in general, you know.
Poor thing is stuck in Kentucky, surrounded by evil.
How about the site plan? I know you don't like the site plan.
Well, what
In there.
what I'm saying is that.
Let's talk about the site plan. Maybe start with the
Yeah,
architect.
go ahead. Tell us
No,
about.
the
what-
site plan, I did not take any responsibility for the site plan. Because,
What is wrong
for a
with
simple
apples?
reason, that Miller had this site of 30 acres with a partner. And Miller cut in 3 pieces of 10.
But look, this is how you used
And
to
he
get.
told me, I want my house here. I said, okay.
But I want everybody to notice something. Watch what happens. Like if you're on this road, you'd go.
That's the running track.
This was for the,
In other words,
because,
you can't get off. You never leave.
no, James, that is, in the house, each morning Miller would get out to run. You know, he was making a tour, so it was a nice sight because but his partner, who was a kind of lazy guy, wanted to be able, I had made a very small track, you know, and his partner wanted to be able to drive his car in the things. It was his way of and we did it larger, you know. So they decided one day they didn't even ask me to make the thing of water, the triangle of water, which I thought was very unquite connected to the house. But one day they did that, and you know, they were developers. They were during the time we built the house. Miller and his partner built 100 houses, and he was always.
If they were to ask you, would you locate the house differently now that you are the expert on the site and the house and everything?
No, the nice thing is after that, when I did the house, I did what I wanted.
Okay.
I did.
But
The only thing he was bothering me is for the trees, but except that, I could do what I wanted. Because it's like always when you do a house, it becomes a drama between the husband and the wife. And Miller himself liked to buy art and paint and Jasper Jones and things like that. And his wife was feeling to be, so she said, I want a very modern building. So he had to do it. I mean,
But I tell you what, they put the worst furniture in it. Just unbelievably god-awful furniture.
You want to show?
And, but, you know, if you go to the site now, there's a subdivision of really bad houses all over it. So, I mean, that's just, what can you do about that? I mean, that's just, yeah.
Can I ask a question about performance?
Sure.
You described criticism as performance, and I noticed you also, your first words to Jose tonight were about performance, were a kind of maybe a facetious performance of his house, maybe not so facetious, where he went out and sort of enacted it as much as he drew it. And it dawns on me that it seems your collection of essays has a similar tack towards most of the architects included, that you, in many respects, you cast their performance through their work. And it seems to me actually the issues with Tom may have had a lot to do with his discomfort with the idea of,
Right.
of his work being an act in that.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's first of all, it's very important to me to keep the author involved, and it's very important for me to not allow the author to control the work. You know, I love Christopher Walken's approach to a script, and he gets the script, and there's two parts. One is he crosses out his own lines, but then he circles all the other actors' lines. So he wants them to say their lines so that he can improvise his lines. So, you know, so I think these are ephemeral and elusive relationships, and they show up in the work, and I think it's really, you know, so I'm hoping, I have a really simple principle about how you produce architectural meaning and architectural teaching, and that is, I will tell you a story about a building, and it will stay in your head, and I believe if I'm good at it, it'll be a really hard time for you to get it out of your head, but it's your job to either write a better story, learn a better story, or repeat my story, and that's it. So that way, you're trapped. You know? So, and I've been successful on some stories and others. But the other thing, I heard Todd mention something earlier. I've had the following things happen to me. I've had architects quote me with made-up quotes that I've made up quotes that they said as if they've said them. In particular, Frank Gehry on Robert Rauschenberg. So I kept trying to get him to say something about Robert Rauschenberg in that film, and he wouldn't say it. So I patched together an audio sentence, and if you listen to it carefully, he goes, Robert Rauschenberg. And now he says, well, as I said in the film. And then I've had architects tell me things about their own work and either forget it or decide they didn't want it to be what they said. Like Koolhaus telling me about the Bibliothèque Nationale. I wrote it. It's the best interpretation of the building I ever heard. He denies it, so I get to own it. You know, so even that, you know, all that stuff happens. So, but I don't like Mark and Beatrice's idea that writing is architecture. I don't like the idea that the building is sufficient in itself, in its experience, and its autonomy, that that's the apotheosis of architecture. It's why I argue to students that the primary vector of architecture is the project, because it's where talking and writing and thinking meets the physicality in its projection. But the most exciting place is when this happens in building, and then it keeps getting discussed and discussed and discussed. So.
Do you think in that sense performance has surpassed the possibilities of theatricality in architecture? Is that part of what makes the contemporary of this period we're in so compelling to you? Or is it, do you think performance and theatricality have any relationships to one another?
Yeah, I mean, you know, when a composer writes, and of course this is now different because you basically write a performance, even if you're a 20th century or 21st century art composer. You know, you're writing in a computer and you're basically making it. You don't really write and then have it performed. So these things are changing. But there's the expectation of multiple performances in different venues and all that sort of stuff. I think the architect probably has to think that his or her building is a singular performance, and in some sense, but the fact that in some sense that there's going to be a governing canonic performance. But the fact that there's a discipline of architecture at all proves that that's not the case. We keep reperforming buildings, and so I think the performance model works really well for me to explain why there's even such a thing as a discipline. And for one thing, if the discipline of architecture was regulated by the experiences of either a client or, you know, of the focused, dedicated users, whether that was the owner of the building or the people that lived in the building, its audience would be so trivially small and its record of that account so inaccessible that it wouldn't have any performances. So the fact that performances can get much, you know, I think, for example, this is now really a book of covers, you know, as opposed to a historical effort to actually get the script, get the...
Is what I like, is it?
Yeah. Okay.
But I want to suggest one thing. I think for me, no, just about this story, I think for me the performance for an architect, not for a critic, okay, is like acting. But acting and improvising, because it is exactly what we did when we did this house. I was confronted to problem, and it's the same thing I did with making the church. I did not have all these things to make the church. I had to decide all the time. And this decision, I remember there is one thing that they were asking me to do, and I said, I don't know how to do it. You have to wait. I don't know. When I will know how to do it, when I will be able to have to feel how it should be, I will tell you. By chance, I had a very nice contractor. But I think, no, but I think it's what is lost very often when you do architecture, is that you lose this kind of possibility of continuous invention, because this is your real creativity, in fact, as an architect. In the past, we were doing that drawing, and now we don't draw, but it's a very important problem, because otherwise you would become completely controlled by a kind of rational, technical way to make things, and it can be fantastic, you know. And last thing, what surprised me is that there's so many people coming for that, because when I see what is going on downstairs, I say, well, this is an old dinosaur of architecture. Maybe the last writings that you do about this type of thing, I don't know. So.
Okay, come get your book signed.
Thanks for coming out.
Thank you.